What is up, guys? In this video, I'm going to be discussing the 3 ways to communicate and how to use them for maximum effect. I'll have a couple tips and a couple warnings for what to watch out for or what to be mindful of that will really take your communication up to the next level. As a little bit of an introduction, what I'd like to say is delving deeper into this topic has had a couple impacts. The first of which is understanding that my current perspective on communication, and maybe yours, is probably to a level where some of this stuff might seem rudimentary. But ultimately, without talking about it, and without writing about it, and without really trying to articulate it, I think I miss out on opportunities to better understand the topic as a whole and the nuances of it. For any topic that you have or any activity that you pursue or any experience that you have, you come to find that there's a lot of nuances to it. If you've ever taken a sport to a higher level, or if you've ever practiced something to a higher level, you begin to understand it differently the better you get or the more skill that you build. I believe this is going to be the same for this. And having done videos for quite a while now, and having been writing about this for quite a while now, and thinking about this for years now, and trying to implement it in my own life, I believe I'm starting to understand some of the nuances. That being said, I don't want to jump straight to nuances. I think there's elements there that could be forgotten or missed, and ultimately kind of attached to the curse of knowledge, which is us forgetting, or me forgetting, or you forgetting, if you are the experienced one, the understanding or what it was like to not know what you know today. And this is a perspective that we need to adopt. And perspective will be a key lesson or element that we need to remember as we move into the video today. So let's jump into it. 3 types of communication. First that I would start out with is written. It's not the first one I wrote down, but it's the first one I believe we should talk about. And the reason for that is because written is not time relevant. I actually prefer written communication at times, handwritten letters, in order to slow things down and to be able to document things or write things down or communicate things in a more controlled fashion. I think there's no time dependency on written communications, right? If you think about in the context of a professional environment, when you get really pissed off and you write an email, you could sit on that email and you could choose to not send it. Or in the event that you do want to do handwritten, which I highly recommend for sensitive issues or to communicate some of your most important relationships, it's been very beneficial for me. You can take your time and you can really work to get it right. I prefer pen and paper. It's incredibly helpful for me. But even if you were typing it, I think that it allows you to take your time, work towards a higher level of clarity. And on the other side, for the audience, for the receiver of your communication, they get to take their time and really try to understand where you're coming from and understand the message that you're trying to convey and take their time in their response. So I think there's a lot of benefits when it comes down to written communication. Now, transitioning into the second form of communication is verbal, which I think is probably the one we're most comfortable with, probably the one we're most familiar with, unless you include text messages in written, which I definitely wouldn't. Any text, direct messages, real-time information that we try to convey, I think they're garbage. I think there's a couple reasons for that. When we get into verbal, there is a lot more time relevance. When you sit and you have a conversation with somebody, usually you can't take 5, 10, 15 minutes, an hour, days to respond. That's going to be incredibly weird. So there is an urgency of the communication. There is a time dependency, a time relevance. You can always put verbal conversations on pause, but it's a little more challenging to do consistently or to really take your time in crafting your message. This is where a lot of preparation can come in, but at the end of the day, if you're just preparing, you don't know what the response is going to be, and you're probably not going to be present in the conversation. It's a big thing for me. I am the king of preparation, self-crowned, and I am the king of planning, self-crowned. But in both of those regards, once you get into a conversation, you will likely not have been prepared or prepared the exact sequence of events, the exact sequences of responses, the exact emotions on the other side. You can get good at it. You can definitely get good at it. You could probably become great at it. But at the end of the day, you cannot predict the future. And this is incredibly important to remember. Verbal, though, obviously, it includes tone. It includes cues. Now, over the phone, you can only get so much, right? Or if you just have audio, you can only get so much. But usually you can be face-to-face, so you have body language involved as well. And all of these things stack up to be a higher level of communication, a higher form of communication, right? Because of all the nuances that come with this form of communication. It's time relevant. There's a lot of cues that go with it. There's body language involved. There's tone involved. There's inflection. There's all of these elements. There's the cadence. There's how quickly you speak. There's the sound of your voice. So all of these factors make it a little bit, one, the stakes, I guess, are a little bit higher. And two, I think it's a more can be communicated with less. So it's a more complicated form of communication. Lastly, we've transitioned to the third form of communication is behavioral. This is what I mean about nuances. This is something I never really would have thought as a form of communication, but the more that I've spent thinking about this the past couple weeks, the more this has kind of come to the forefront. And I think it's something that we all understand, but we likely don't view it this way. But I want to use this simple cliched phrase that actions speak louder than words. And we know that what we do, the way we behave and the way that we act, says things. It sends a message. This is something that I think, I guess from my perspective, I tend to underappreciate. However, I have also used it to my advantage throughout my career and throughout relationships. Getting a gift for someone, or doing something special, or setting up for the night, or the way that you go about your work, it says a lot of things. And this is where I put it as the highest form of communication. Your actions and your behaviors will communicate the most. And you can work your way back down to verbal and written. This is where starting off with written, I think, makes the most sense as the simplest form of communication, and one where you can probably exert the most control in the simplest fashion. Therefore, I think it's the one that is the hardest to fuck up. You still can, definitely. And I think written communication can definitely be dependent upon the relationship you build. All forms of communication are heavily dependent upon that. Communication builds a relationship, and your relationship helps you interpret the communication. I think it's a cycle. So a couple things here. Behavioral. This might be a different form of communication than you've ever thought of, or you might not have thought of it as a form of communication. But if you view it through this lens, then you have the opportunity to understand and review your behavioral, your verbal, and your written communications for alignment. And for the maximum effect that you could possibly get, these should all remain consistent. If you think about any time that you've experienced somebody being inconsistent in one of those ways, how it puts all this stuff into confusion or causes you to question the intentions or what is meant, right, by the other person. So, in your communication, in the messages that you're trying to send, be sure to review and be aware of the consistency of your messaging. Are you sending conflicting messages through the different channels? Or are you consistent and aligned? That alignment and consistency will make sure that you will achieve maximum effect with what you're trying to convey, with the message you're trying to get across. So it is important to take time to journal, to reflect, to review that your channels are sending the same messages. Lastly, the message that you think you are sending is not necessarily the message that they're receiving. This comes back to the relationships, but ultimately this comes back to perception. And so when you know very little about somebody, sometimes you'll never know exactly how they will perceive something. I mean, all the time you will never know, but you can get a very informed decision or a very informed perspective about how they could perceive your message. Oftentimes people view your message in the way that's most important to them, or they're watching for certain things because of what matters most to them. Knowing this, great communication, I think, can be had and can be at your disposal when you learn how to understand and think in someone else's shoes. That old element, when you review and you try to understand and you accurately predict how someone will perceive a message, you can craft that message for maximum impact. So coupling these two things together is the superpower, is communicating at a higher level. You communicate consistently across all channels, so your message is crystal clear and concrete. It is uniform. There's nothing that's going to put it backwards or have it be confusing. There's nothing that takes the clarity down. It's super clear what you mean and how you mean it. That's what we're striving for. When you do this in a way that aligns with that individual the most by anticipating their perception, which is a skill, it takes time. It takes time to understand people. It takes a relationship. That's how you get the maximum impact. It is a message that is crafted specifically for the audience in a way that is fully and completely aligned in the clearest way possible. So hopefully that helps. I believe it is a fundamental lesson with some nuances in there. So no matter your level of communication skills, I think that is beneficial. And if you hadn't ever thought about it, which I hadn't until recently, think about your actions and your behaviors and what message that's sending. I think this is something that sometimes escapes us. It's not right at the forefront of our minds. We're not thinking about it. So it's something to start to be mindful of. Hopefully this helps. If you like the video, like and subscribe. You can't lose if you don't quit.